There are stories that cling to you, not because of what they show, but because of what they suggest. Stories that whisper at the edge of your mind when the night grows heavy and the rain taps against your window. This is one of them. The story of a mirror that did not reflect, not quite. The story of a man who stared too long and found something staring back. Tonight, we travel slowly into his life, his silence, his unraveling. Let the thunder roll, let the rain fall, and if you feel eyes watching, you are not alone. That it began with something ordinary. A man moving into a new house. His name was Thomas Hale, 43 years old, a quiet man with little to boast of and little to regret. After a divorce and years of city noise, he craved stillness. The house he bought stood on the edge of a forgotten town, where the streets thinned out and trees leaned heavy over cracked pavement. That it was not a remarkable house. 2 stories, pale paint peeling in strips, windows that rattled in the wind. But in the listing, one thing had caught his eye. The antique fixtures. The ad mentioned original woodwork, century-old cabinets, and a mirror, a tall, beveled mirror set into the upstairs hallway. When he first stepped inside, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a box of books, the house smelled of dust and rain-soaked timber. The silence felt different from the city's, thicker, as though the walls held their breath. The mirror stood at the end of the hallway exactly as described. Nearly 7 feet tall, framed in dark oak carved with twisting vines. Its glass had dulled with age, but still caught enough light to shimmer faintly when he walked by. Thomas paused in front of it. His reflection was faint, blurred, almost gray. He thought at first it was the glass itself, stained with time. But when he wiped at it with his sleeve, the reflection did not sharpen. Instead, the outline of his face seemed slightly wrong. His shoulders stooped lower. His eyes appeared darker, like bruises beneath the skin. He shook his head. Just old glass, he told himself. Distorted, like the mirrors at carnival funhouses. That night, he unpacked a little. Made tea. Listened to the rain against the roof. He had no television, no distractions. Only the whisper of the storm and the occasional creak of the settling house. When he climbed the stairs to bed, he glanced once more at the mirror. For a moment, he thought the hallway behind him, reflected in the glass, looked longer than it should have. As though the corridor stretched on, doors leading to rooms that did not exist. He did not stop to study it. He told himself he was tired. And when he lay in bed, he slept with unusual ease. The kind of sleep that comes when a man finally escapes the weight of his old life. But dreams came. They were not violent or loud. They were quiet. A sense of standing in a long, dark corridor. No windows. No doors. Just endless walls of faded wallpaper, and at the far end, a figure standing so still it might have been carved from the dark itself. Thomas could not see its face. But he felt, with the certainty of instinct, that it was him. When he woke, the storm had passed. The morning light was thin and gray. He rubbed his eyes, told himself it was a dream like any other. Yet when he went downstairs for coffee, he noticed his reflection again in the mirror at the hall's end. This time, the reflection smiled. He had not. Thomas stood frozen, the mug trembling in his hand. His reflection's lips curled into a faint, knowing grin before smoothing back into neutrality. He blinked, leaned closer, searching for any logical trick of the light. The reflection stared back. Calm. Expressionless. Perfectly still. The rest of the day was uneventful. He busied himself with arranging the kitchen, carrying boxes, making small notes about repairs. But no matter where he went in the house, he felt aware of the mirror behind him. It was not fear, not yet. Just awareness. Like the feeling of someone standing in the same room while saying nothing at all. By evening, the silence of the house pressed deeper. He opened the windows to let in the sound of wind, but the air felt heavy, unwilling to move. He read from an old book, but the words slipped past his attention. His thoughts returned, again and again, to that brief smile. When he finally went upstairs, the mirror caught him again. He stood before it deliberately this time, forcing himself to watch. For long minutes, his reflection did nothing unusual. It matched his movements, his breathing, even the slight twitch of his fingers. Then, without warning, the reflection leaned closer. Just slightly. Enough to suggest it had moved before he had. Thomas stumbled back, heart thudding in his throat. The reflection did not correct itself. It stood, tilted just a degree too forward, its eyes a shade too dark that he hurried past it, into his room, and closed the door. The rest of the night he did not sleep easily. The rain returned, tapping on the window, and with each groan of the house, he thought he heard movement in the hallway, not footsteps. Something softer, like breath against glass. The next morning, Thomas avoided the mirror. It wasn't deliberate at first. He simply chose a different route to the kitchen, carrying his coffee downstairs and keeping to the far wall on his way back up. But every time he passed the end of the hallway, he felt its pull. That quiet insistence. The way the light always seemed to fall on it, no matter the time of day. By afternoon, he gave in. He stood before it, clutching the mug with both hands, staring into the gray glass. His reflection returned his stare. But something about it unsettled him more than the smile from the day before. It was too still. Too patient. Thomas shifted his weight, and though the image mirrored the movement, there was a fraction of a pause. Not long enough to prove anything. Just enough to suggest intention. He reached out, pressing his fingertips against the cool surface. The glass hummed faintly beneath his skin, like a deep vibration, almost below hearing. He jerked his hand away, breath caught. When he looked again, his reflection's hand lingered a heartbeat longer before retreating. Thomas laughed nervously. Out loud. As though sound could puncture the strangeness. Just old glass, he muttered. Old wood settling. Tricks of the storm. But when he turned away, he swore he heard it, not from behind him. From within the glass. A whisper. He didn't catch the words. Just the cadence. A murmur like someone speaking softly in the next room. That night, he left the upstairs light on. He told himself it was practical, just until he fixed the wiring that made the house flicker in storms. But when he woke around 3 in the morning, the light in the hallway still burned, and the mirror caught it. He lay in bed, staring at the thin strip of illumination beneath his door. And he realized the glow shifted. As though something stood between the light and his room. Slowly. Patiently. Blocking it out in rhythmic intervals, like pacing. Thomas pressed his hands over his ears, but it didn't block the sound. The whisper had returned. Clearer this time. Low, deliberate syllables curling out of the mirror's depths. Come closer. His skin prickled cold. He told himself he was dreaming. He had to be. But when thunder cracked outside and lightning flashed across the window, he saw it, the faintest reflection of movement. A shape in the hallway, darker than the dark. He stayed in bed until the sky paled with dawn. Over the following days, Thomas tried distraction. He worked on the garden, read for hours, walked the perimeter of the property. Yet no matter how he filled his time, he felt the mirror waiting. One evening, after a particularly long silence, he found himself standing in front of it again. He told himself he would prove it harmless. That he would stand, and he would watch, and nothing would happen. Minutes passed. His reflection matched him, perfectly still. Then, softly, the glass fogged. As though something inside had breathed against it, words formed in the mist. Faint. Uneven. Let me out. Thomas stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. His heart hammered against his ribs. He blinked, and the words were gone. Only his pale, wide-eyed reflection remained that he locked his bedroom door that night. But even with the door closed, he heard it, the steady scrape of fingernails on glass. Sleep came in fragments. And with sleep came dreams. This time, the corridor was closer. He could hear his own breath echoing along its walls. And at the far end, the figure had stepped forward. Just a little. Enough that he could see its outline more clearly. That it was him. But not him. Taller. Shoulders bent at wrong angles. Its head tilted as though listening. When Thomas woke, the taste of iron lingered on his tongue. 3 days later, he invited company. Not out of loneliness, but out of dread. He called his sister, who lived an hour away, and asked her to visit. When she arrived, cheerful and curious about his new house, Thomas felt a weight lift from the air. They cooked dinner, shared a bottle of wine, laughed more than he had in months, but when she went upstairs to use the bathroom, she paused in the hallway. "Tom," she called. His stomach sank. "What is it?" "This mirror," she said slowly. "It's strange. It doesn't look right." He forced a smile when she returned. "Just old glass," he said. "Distorts things." She frowned. It looked like I was frowning when I wasn't. Just for a second. Thomas laughed it off, steering the conversation elsewhere. But later that night, after she left, he returned to the hallway, and there it was. His reflection, smiling again. That was the first time he covered it. He found an old sheet in the attic and draped it over the frame, weighing it down so no draft could pull it loose. The relief was immediate. The hallway felt less oppressive. His bedroom door seemed lighter, but that night, around midnight, the sheet slipped. He didn't see it happen. He only woke to the sound of fabric dragging across the floor. When he opened his door, the mirror stood bare once again, and in the glass, his reflection was gone. The hallway stretched into darkness. Empty, and then, slowly, it stepped back into view, not from his side. From the other. Thomas no longer pretended it was just glass. He began to keep the lights on constantly. He spoke to himself, filling the silence with noise. He avoided the upstairs whenever possible, but mirrors do not need your attention to work. They wait. They watch, and in the dead of night, when thunder rattled the windows and rain pounded the roof, Thomas swore he heard laughter, soft, muffled, coming from the glass. For 2 nights, Thomas avoided the mirror. He kept to the downstairs sofa, wrapping himself in blankets. The storm's rumble overhead his only companion. It was easier that way. The glass was out of sight. The whispers seemed softer, but objects like that don't need to be seen to work. On the 3rd night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Thomas dreamed again. He stood in the hallway. Bare feet cold against old wood. The mirror loomed at the far end, uncovered. This time, the figure stood right behind the glass. Not distant. Not waiting. Close. Its forehead nearly pressed against the surface. Thomas's breath fogged the dream air. On the other side, the figure's fog bloomed as well. Perfectly mirrored. Except, the smile was wrong. Too wide. Too sharp. The reflection lifted its hand, pressing fingers against the glass. Thomas did the same. For a moment, their palms aligned, and then the glass softened, cold surface turning fluid, bending inward as though it were water. The figure's fingers pushed through. Long, thin. Bone white, slick with condensation. They curled against his wrist, cold and strong. Thomas woke with a strangled gasp. His arm burned where he'd felt the grip. He stumbled to the bathroom, switching on the light. His skin was unmarked, yet he swore he still felt it. A faint, icy pressure. The next day, he tried to work. Tried to keep busy. He made tea. Cleaned the kitchen. Walked the yard. But every reflective surface seemed off. The window panes showed shadows moving when he stood still. His spoon caught his face, distorted but smiling when he wasn't. Even the dark water in the sink seemed to shift. That evening, he taped black cloth over the bathroom mirror. He unplugged the TV, turned its screen toward the wall. He covered the hallway glass again, heavier this time, with nails pinning fabric in place, but at night, thunder shook the nails loose. The storm itself seemed to conspire. By 3 in the morning, the covering lay crumpled on the floor, the mirror stared bare and silver once more, and this time, Thomas saw not one figure, but two. Both his reflection. Both smiling. That he called a local antique dealer the next day, desperate to be rid of it. "I've got a mirror," he explained, voice thin with exhaustion. "An old one. Large. Heavy frame. Could you take it?" The man asked for photos. Thomas refused. "You'll have to see it yourself." But the dealer never came. Rain had washed out the road, he said. Another time. Another day, the mirror stayed. That night, the dream was different. That he wasn't standing before the mirror. He was inside it. The hallway stretched backward, endless, walls warped and bent like glass under pressure. His reflection, the real him, stood outside, staring in. "Let me out," the reflection whispered. The voice was his own. Clear. Urgent. Thomas stumbled backward through the warped corridor, heart hammering. And as he moved, he saw them, figures lining the mirrored walls. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one human-shaped, but pale, distorted. Their eyes were wide. Their mouths open. Frozen in silent screams. Some were old. Some looked modern. All were trapped. Thomas turned and ran. But no matter how far he went, the hallway only stretched further. The whispers grew louder. Voices overlapping. Pleading, "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." He woke to his own voice echoing in the dark room, and from the hallway came the sound of something tapping, slow. Steady. Fingernails against glass. The following day, Thomas tried to leave the house. He packed a bag, tossed it into the car, and turned the ignition. The engine roared. The rain eased. The driveway stretched clear, but in the rearview mirror, his reflection didn't look away. That it smiled, and when he turned his head, his real head, he realized he hadn't smiled at all. Thomas slammed the mirror out of alignment and drove until the road disappeared under floodwater. He returned, defeated, the house waiting like a patient host. That night, the mirror no longer bothered with subtleties. When Thomas crept upstairs to grab clothes, he glanced unwillingly at it, and saw the reflection step out of sync entirely. It tilted its head while he stood straight. It blinked when he did not, and then, as thunder lit the sky, it mouthed words that he read them clearly. "Your turn." Thomas barely slept. He sat in the living room, every lamp blazing, clutching the useless satellite phone his sister had once teased him for keeping. He dozed only in short bursts, each dream dragging him back to the endless hallway of glass. By dawn, he was hollow-eyed, and still, upstairs, the mirror waited. On the 5th day, Thomas made a choice that he couldn't cover it. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't leave. So he would break it, armed with a hammer. He climbed the stairs, breath shallow. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the stormlight flickering against the walls. He raised the hammer high, and froze, because in the mirror, his reflection wasn't holding a hammer. It was holding nothing at all. It simply smiled, tilting its head, and from within the glass, dozens of pale figures pressed closer, their hands slapping the surface in unison. Silent. Begging, Thomas screamed and swung, the hammer struck, the glass cracked, just once, splitting like a spiderweb, for a heartbeat, silence, and then, softly, a whisper from every fracture, "Your turn." The crack in the mirror changed everything. That it was no longer a single surface. It was a broken mouth, a jagged wound in the house itself. Thomas couldn't stop staring at it. By day, the fracture glistened faintly in the dim light of the hallway. By night, the crack spread like veins across the glass, and from those veins came whispers. They did not echo now. They did not linger like imagination. They were clear. Crisp. Countless voices murmuring in unison, some begged, some wept, some laughed, thin and hollow, but one voice, sharp and familiar, rose above the rest, his own. "Thomas," it hissed, "Thomas, come closer." He avoided the hallway. For hours, he stayed downstairs, pacing from window to window as rain battered the roof. Every reflective surface was covered, foil over the kitchen window, towels draped across glass. Still, the mirror called. At midnight, thunder rattled the walls. And in the brief flicker of lightning, Thomas saw something impossible. The crack in the mirror was glowing. Not brightly. Just faintly. Like the ember of a dying fire, and with that glow came movement. Shadows slid behind the fractured glass, shapes pressing forward as if testing a barrier. That night, sleep offered no escape. That he dreamed again of the hallway within the mirror. But this time, it was shorter. The endless stretch had collapsed into something nearer. And the figures, those pale, frozen souls, were closer. 2.1 stood apart from the rest. That it looked like him, not the twisted, grinning reflection he'd seen before. This one was tired. Hollow-eyed. A perfect copy of himself, but broken somehow. "You cracked it," the double whispered. Its lips trembled, voice shaking like static. That was the last lock. "It's coming through." Thomas staggered back. "What do you mean?" The double reached out, hand trembling. "We were the barrier. All of us. Every soul it's ever caught. We kept it in. But now," the whisper rose, overlapping with the chorus of voices, "Your turn, your turn, your turn." Thunder snapped him awake, the house groaned around him. The storm had grown violent. Rain lashed against the windows like thrown stones. Wind screamed down the chimney, and then, another sound. A crack, not thunder. Not wood, glass, the mirror. Thomas crept upstairs, hammer in hand. His steps shook beneath him. He knew what he would see before he saw it. The fracture had widened. Splinters spread across the surface like frost. A chunk of glass had fallen out entirely, shattering across the hallway floor, and through that empty space, there was no wall. No reflection, only darkness. A hollow void, deep and endless, breathing faintly like lungs. Thomas dropped the hammer. His skin prickled with the sense of being watched. The whispering voices rose until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, and then, something reached out. A hand. Long, pale, too thin. Its fingers dripped with condensation. They flexed in the stormlight, curling against the wood of the hallway floor. Thomas stumbled back, heart hammering. The hand withdrew slowly, as if savoring the fear, and then another pressed forward. Not his reflection. Not a soul, something else. That he slammed his bedroom door, locking it, dragging furniture against the frame. For hours, he sat there, heart pounding, listening. The whispers grew louder. Closer. He heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. He heard glass crackling, splintering further. Sometimes, he heard his own voice calling. Sometimes his sister's. Sometimes voices he didn't recognize at all, each one pleading. Each one mocking. By dawn, silence, when he dared open the door, the hallway was littered with shards. The mirror frame was nearly empty now, only a sliver of glass remained, jagged and sharp at the corner, and beyond the frame stretched that same impossible void that he called the antique dealer again. Desperate, "You don't understand," Thomas rasped. "It's broken. It's not just a mirror. You have to take it." The dealer's voice on the other end was slow. Hesitant, "I don't know what you're talking about." And then Thomas heard it, the faintest echo in the background of the call, his own voice, whispering, "Your turn." He dropped the phone. That night, he tried fire. He doused the frame with lighter fluid and struck a match. For a moment, flames roared high, smoke choking the air, but instead of burning, the mirror absorbed. The flames bent inward, sucked into the void like water down a drain. The room plunged dark again, smoke curling back into the glass. From the frame came a sound, not a whisper, not a laugh, breathing, slow. Heavy. Patient, something alive. Thomas sat in the living room until morning. He hadn't the strength to fight anymore. His reflection, wherever it was, had stopped appearing in water, in windows, in spoons. That it had abandoned him, and now, he understood why. The mirror didn't want the reflection that it wanted him. By the seventh night, the mirror was empty. No glass remained. Only the carved wooden frame stood, humming faintly, like a doorway waiting to be walked through, and from the void inside, two eyes blinked open, not his. Not human, eyes that had watched 1,000 trapped souls, eyes that had learned their every fear. Thomas didn't scream. Didn't run. The storm outside was louder than his heartbeat. The rain washed the windows clean, and the thunder masked the sound of the first step the creature took out of the frame. The frame stood empty, yet it was not empty at all. Thomas knew this instinctively as he sat in the hallway at dawn, staring into the hollow space where glass should have been. The carved wood seemed older now, blackened by something that was not fire, and the void within pulsed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. He could not look away. The longer he stared, the stronger the pull became. His reflection was gone. Entirely. No trace of himself remained in any surface. In the kitchen sink, there was only still water. In the windows, only the storm. He was invisible to the world. The mirror had stolen his image. And now it was reaching for more. That night, the breathing began. It started faint, an exhale that seemed to ride the wind. Then deeper. Heavier. Until the entire house seemed to rise and fall with each inhale. The void inside the frame expanded with every breath, stretching wider, as though lungs too vast for this world were pressing against it. Thomas pressed his ear to the wall. It was not just in the hallway, the breathing was everywhere, through the pipes, through the vents, through the wooden beams of the house itself. The mirror wasn't holding the entity anymore. The mirror was the entity. On the third night after the glass had fallen, Thomas began to see shapes in the dark, not directly, never head-on. But in the corners of his eyes, figures lingered. When he turned, there was nothing but shadow. But each time, the shadow seemed closer. At first, it was a suggestion of movement near the doorframe. Then it was something crouched at the foot of his bed. By the fourth night, it was standing directly in front of him, tall, patient, faceless, and still, he could not see it, only the suggestion of it. The negative space where it did not belong. The silence it carried with it, like the air itself holding its breath. Thomas tried leaving. He stuffed clothes into a bag, dragged it to the door, and reached for the knob, but when he opened the door, there was only darkness, not night. Not storm. Not street, just black. A hallway of shadows, endless, identical to the one in the mirror. He slammed the door shut. Heart hammering. Tried the windows. Same thing, the world outside had gone. Or perhaps, he had gone. The phone rang that night. Thomas jumped at the sound, nearly dropping the lamp he'd been clutching for light. He snatched the receiver, desperate for any voice not his own. "Hello." Static. Then, his sister's voice, "Thomas. Oh my God, you sound terrible. I've been trying to reach you for days." Relief broke through his chest. "Listen to me," he said, voice shaking. "The mirror, it's alive. You have to come get me. Please. Please, I can't." She cut him off. "Thomas," she whispered, her tone suddenly flat. "Turn around." He froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the hallway. The frame was glowing again. And in its hollow void, he saw her. His sister. Reaching out. Smiling, but her hand was wrong. Too long. Too thin. "Come closer," the voice on the phone whispered. "You'll be safe with me." He dropped the receiver. It didn't stop speaking. From the floor, from the broken wire, from the hollow plastic shell, her voice crawled out, whispering, whispering, whispering. "By now." Sleep was impossible. Every time his eyes closed, he was back in the mirror's hallway. Only now, it was no longer endless. It was closing in. Narrower each night. The pale figures pressed closer, their mouths opening and closing in silent pleas that he asked them for answers. They only mimicked his own questions back. That he screamed. They screamed with him, and always, at the end of the dream, came the double. His hollow-eyed reflection, stepping forward with arms outstretched. "You're not supposed to fight it," the double whispered. "You're supposed to take your place." Thomas would wake up drenched in sweat, his mouth full of the taste of dust and glass. On the seventh night, the doorway widened. It was no longer the size of the mirror frame. It was taller, broader, swallowing the wall around it. The wallpaper curled inward, wood bending toward the void. The house was collapsing into it, and something stepped through. Thomas didn't see it directly. He never could. But he felt it. The floorboards bowed under its weight. The ceiling groaned. The temperature dropped until his breath plumed white in the air. It circled him slowly, each step measured, invisible, but undeniable, and then, it spoke, not in words. Not in whispers. It spoke with his own breath. His own heartbeat. His own trembling thoughts. It was him. He sat in the living room until morning. The storm had ended. The world outside was lightless still, the windows nothing but black glass, and yet, for the first time in days, the house was silent. No whispers. No breathing. No voices. The frame in the hallway was gone, only the wall remained. But Thomas knew better. It hadn't left. It didn't need the mirror anymore. It was inside him now. For days, Thomas didn't leave the chair. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. The storm had passed, the dripping in the eaves had stopped, even the pipes seemed still. Yet the silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed down on him like weight, like being buried under snow. Sometimes, he thought he heard the phone ring again. Sometimes, he thought he heard footsteps pacing in the upstairs hall. But when he strained to listen, he realized the sounds weren't coming from outside him, they were inside his chest. Inside his head, the mirror had stopped speaking. It no longer needed to. On the third morning, Thomas tried to write. He found an old notebook and pen in the kitchen drawer and sat at the table. His hands shook as he scrawled the words, "I am still me. I am Thomas. This is my house. This is my world." But when he turned the page, the writing was already there. His words, copied in the same shaky scrawl. Line for line, only, some of them were wrong. "I am still here. I am hollow. This is not my house. This is not my world." He dropped the pen, staring in disbelief. His reflection, it seemed, had learned to write back. The walls began to change next at first. It was faint, patterns in the wallpaper that seemed to spiral when he blinked. Then deeper. Shapes carved into the plaster, curling in tight, impossible symbols. Everywhere he looked, the house was being rewritten. The kitchen tiles rippled like water when he stepped on them. The windows bent and stretched, warping the view into darkness. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, like breathing rust. That he pressed his palms to the wall one night and felt it breathing beneath his skin. Not outward. Inward. As though it were pulling him closer. By the seventh day, Thomas could no longer remember the shape of his own face. That he touched the mirror in the bathroom, what was left of it, cracked and splintered, and tried to recall his features. Brown hair, tired eyes, a scar under his chin. Yes, those had been his once, but now, when he imagined his reflection, it was blank. A hollow outline of a man. No features. No self, and it comforted him. The emptiness felt right. That he began dreaming of the hallway again, not as nightmare this time, but as homecoming. The long corridor stretched endlessly, its walls whispering with voices he almost recognized. Old teachers. Lost friends. His mother, long gone. They didn't speak words, only soft murmurs, broken syllables, but he understood them. They were calling him closer. The pale figure still stood in the distance. But now, instead of reaching toward him, they turned and walked ahead, guiding him deeper into the dark. And for the first time, Thomas followed point. One night, he woke to find the notebook open on his lap. His handwriting filled every page, but he didn't remember writing. The entries weren't his thoughts, they were reports. Observations. Subject resists at first. Subject weakens with time. Identity erodes under sustained exposure. Reflection synchronizes with host. Host willingly transitions. That he dropped the book in horror, his breath ragged. But even as he did, the words didn't feel foreign. They felt familiar. They felt like his. By now, the house was gone. Or maybe it still stood, but Thomas could no longer tell where the walls ended and the mirror began. Every surface shimmered faintly, like glass just before it cracks. His footsteps echoed too long, as though bouncing through a cavern. Sometimes, when he reached for a doorknob, another hand reached back. His own hand. From the other side, and the strangest part, he didn't recoil anymore. The touch was warm. Familiar. Comforting, like shaking hands with himself. On the 12th night, Thomas finally saw his double again. It stood in the hallway, where the frame had once been, waiting. Its face was no longer hollow. It had his eyes now. His mouth. His scar under the chin, only, he was the hollow one. He realized this with sudden, devastating clarity. The double wasn't stealing him. It was replacing him. Filling the space he had abandoned, and he was the reflection, fading into glass. The double reached out a hand. And this time, Thomas didn't hesitate. He reached back. The last thing Thomas remembered was the sound of breaking glass, not loud. Not violent. Just a gentle crack, like ice splitting under spring thaw. Then, silence. When the neighbors were interviewed later, they said the house looked untouched. No signs of struggle. No broken windows. Just a dusty old frame leaning against the wall, its glass perfectly intact once more, and if you looked closely, some swore, you could see a man inside it. Sitting very still. His mouth moving soundlessly, as though whispering to himself. The rain had ended, but the silence it left behind was worse than the storm. Thomas sat at the edge of his bed, hands pressed to his temples, the echo of the voices still reverberating in his skull. For 3 nights he had endured the mimicry, the whispers, the laughter, the careful repetitions of his own words twisted into shapes that weren't quite human. He hadn't left the cabin. Not once. He barely slept. Barely ate. Each time his eyelids closed, the sounds returned, scrapes against the walls, footsteps pacing outside, the faint hum of his old radio flickering with static that carried his voice back at him. At first, he thought it was madness. Isolation, exhaustion, stress. But then the patterns began. The creature, or whatever intelligence haunted him, did not speak randomly. It studied. It replayed sentences with tiny variations. It mimicked his cadence, then distorted it, then improved it. As if practicing. As if preparing for something larger than just tormenting a broken man in the woods. On the morning of the fourth day, Thomas found the radio switched on, though he hadn't touched it. The dial had been turned to a dead frequency, yet the static pulsed with a strange rhythm. A beat. A language he couldn't understand, and then he heard it, his own voice, projected clearly, not from his mouth, but from the radio itself. This is Thomas Reed. Broadcast test 1. Location, cabin 12. Transmission strength, stable. He froze. He had never said those words. Not once. The voice continued, signal is consistent. Expanding range. They can hear us now. Thomas tore the batteries out, but the voice kept going. The radio wasn't powered anymore. It was broadcasting on its own. Later, when investigators eventually found the cabin, they described the scene as strangely undisturbed. The food supplies were still neatly packed. The lantern was filled with oil. The bed, though unmade, bore no signs of struggle, but Thomas was gone. What remained was the radio, sitting squarely in the center of the wooden table. Its speaker buzzed faintly, as though alive. Agents from the research unit claimed it was an interference phenomenon, the product of ionized storms disrupting the frequency bands. The official report described Thomas Reed as presumed missing due to environmental disorientation. But those who were there, those who stood in that silent cabin and listened, swear they heard something else. They say the radio spoke. Not just once, but over and over. It began with Thomas's voice. His tone was frantic, desperate. Please. It's not me. Don't believe what you hear. Don't believe it. Then it shifted. The words slowed. Deepened. Layered. Testing complete. We are ready. Finally, the static cleared entirely, and what came through was not a voice at all, but a chorus. 1,000 overlapping tones, each one shaped like speech, but not meant for human ears. The sound rattled the windows. It made the lanterns flicker. It made the walls themselves feel as though they were breathing. The officers who heard it reported the same sensation, a presence listening back, and then the broadcast cut to silence. Weeks later, hikers in the area claimed to hear familiar voices echoing in the forest at night. A man calling for help. A woman laughing softly in the trees. Children singing in broken unison, but when they followed the sounds, there was never anyone there, just the jungle. Just the rain, and sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, a faint, electric hum. The case of Thomas Reed remains officially unsolved. His body was never recovered. The cabin has since been sealed, its contents stored in evidence facilities under restricted access. The radio, however, was never catalogued. It was placed into a crate, logged under an incorrect tag, and misplaced somewhere in the warehouse system. No one can say where it is now, but strange signals have begun appearing on open frequencies across the Pacific Northwest. Late at night, amateur radio operators report hearing voices stitched together out of static. Sometimes they sound like strangers. Sometimes they sound like people they know, and sometimes, very clearly, they sound like Thomas. Test signal, stable. Transmission expanding. Range increasing. The rain falls outside your window now. steady, soft, hypnotic. You close your eyes and let it lull you into calm, but under the rain, under the thunder, if you listen carefully, not too carefully, you may notice the static, a faint pulse, a rhythm, a voice not your own, and if you hear it whisper your name, do not answer, because that's how it learns you, that's how it begins.